Hi, welcome to the North Yorkshire Sport Physical Active Learning Bite Size Top Tips. I'm Gavin Phillis. I'm the development manager that supports the primary schools around their P&E School Sports Premium, and I've been fortunate enough to be joined virtually by Alex Ogden from Burn to Learn, who's one of our physically active learning specialists in the county. We're a bit of a hotspot across North Yorkshire. So Alex is going to go through some top tips, some of the stuff that he's done in the schools that he's been working in and how he kind of came to be Mr. Burn to Learn. And then we'll just pick up a bit of a conversation, some questions around what we've been hearing and seeing from schools and how physical active learning could potentially support them in the environment that we currently find ourselves trying to educate children. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Gav. Yep, so as Gav's already said, my name is Alex Ogden, the founder of Burn to Learn, Physical Active Learning. I am a former primary school teacher of over 12 years and PE and sport leader, and Burn to Learn was actually born out of a pilot project that I did at my last school. And due to its success and the impact it had on whole school improvement, I then moved into education consultancy, in particular in the areas of physical active learning. So I'm going to share my screen in a second, and I'm going to maybe spend about 10 minutes just sharing with you some top tips on how to implement physical active learning in your school. Hopefully you'll find it really useful. I won't spend too long at all, and I've actually gone for the unconventional approach of 7 tips, if that's okay, rather than 5 or 10. We could spend all day, but we're gonna roll with 7. So hopefully you can all see that, and we'll get started. Okay. So top tips for implementing physical active learning. There's my details there at the bottom if you're wanting to follow Burn to Learn on social media, and my email details are there, but I'll share those at the end as well. My first tip, I'm going to look at the bigger picture, and that is to take ownership as a school on physical active learning, because this needs to be a whole school approach if physical active learning is going to be embedded successfully and in a sustainable way. And that's obviously the same with any approach, be it maths, mastery, whatever it might be. The whole school needs to take ownership of it, and physical active learning is no different. We can't just be placing a resource, be it a subscription to a physical active learning resource, and placing it in front of teachers, expecting them to go away and do it with their class, because there's no buy-in. So it needs to come from the top. So I would urge you as a P leader or whoever is watching this, if you're interested in embedding physical active learning, is to create this whole school ownership culture, just like you would with kind of safeguarding. It's everybody's responsibility. It's on the tips of everybody's tongues. Physical active learning should be the same. Help each other to embrace the power of physical active learning, to recognize the impact it has. And I use the embrace, empower, and embed approach with schools I work with. So help them to empower each other to use physical active learning consistently, purposefully, and seamlessly. And I'll go into a couple of ways of how that could be done. Then help each other to embed physical active learning across the whole school to drive whole school improvement. And that's the message to senior leadership teams. This can be a driver for whole school improvement. It's not just something to get the children's active 30 minutes in there. That's a huge benefit, but this can impact on the whole child and those whole school improvement priorities. And finally, help each other to explore a powerful approach that aims to complement existing teaching methods and not replace them altogether. And that's a really important message to teachers in particular. This isn't here to replace the writing in the books. There was really important evidence that you need to show. It's here to complement that, not to replace it. So take ownership of the school, everybody's responsibility, have those conversations from the SLT and top down, and don't bypass that step. It's really important if you want sustainable active learning. Okay, next one, we're gonna move to number 2, which I'm calling top tip, is poke the fire. Now, what I mean by poke the fire is be brave enough as a staff team, if you like, to have potentially open, honest, transparent conversations. And that might lead to a little bit of awkwardness, an awkward conversation, but that's all good because the learning from that and the feedback you get from that, and therefore supportive culture you get from that is really important, and it's brilliant when you actually see it happening. So we always self-reflect anyway as teachers, don't we, as staff, on how am I doing in lesson, what do I need to change, what went well, what didn't go well. So my advice to you is to get staff to reflect on their practice. And I've always done this with a bit of a rainbow approach, where I get the staff to place themselves on this scale, this reflection rainbow, if you like, and they ask themselves a couple of questions. First question, picture your normal teaching day. How active are your learning tasks? So your average day, might be Monday, Tuesday, whatever it is, picture it, then think throughout the day, how active are your learning tasks in your lesson? And they'll place themselves on that scale. What we often find is Key Stage 1, EYFS, they might be up there in the greens, very active, because naturally, obviously, the way that those children are learning, free flow, moving from area to area, lends itself nicely to movement. But then I get them to focus on, well, actually, what about your learning tasks? That's the movement in between. The specific tasks you set, are they active? And we see Key Stage 2 often within fairly or not at all. And there's a clear pattern. So it's a nice activity to do, to really see visually, particularly if the teachers are standing by some cones, what does the active learning picture look like in your school? And how can you change it accordingly? But then I always get them to ask this question as well. Oops, excuse me. I get them to answer this question as well. And this is where potentially some uncomfortable conversations could occur, but it's all good. It's all good. And that question is, what hurdles do you feel you need to jump? I say hurdles, not barriers. Barriers aren't there to necessarily be knocked down. Hurdles are there to be jumped. And so any hurdle that a teacher has can be jumped if it's met in a supportive way. So often these hurdles might be, okay, I don't have enough time. A teacher might say to me, I don't have time, we've got to evidence this work in books. How am I going to be able to do that if I've got the children active and things like that? The answer to that would be, again, it's not there to complement and replace. It needs to be there to support that work. But what also comes out of this might be hurdles such as, well, it's not how they learn best. I know that they're learning correctly when they're sat down at a table. When they're moving around, I think they're going to misbehave. So then we start to talk about, well, how could we combat that? How could we stop that potential misbehavior if there's one person in your class that you think is going to behave in that way? And we start to kind of support each other and talk about, well, actually, these hurdles are not as big as we originally thought. And the most important thing to do if you are going to engage in a conversation with your staff in a training session about physical active learning is to ask the head teacher, how would you feel if you walked past the class and there was a teacher and their children in the classroom who were very active, potentially very noisy, moving around the classroom, creating a lot of noise? Would you feel that those children aren't learning correctly? Because a lot of teachers feel that if there was a learning walk taking place and physical active learning was taking place in their classroom, they would feel they're being judged negatively because of the noise that might be created in the movement. That's a natural reaction as teachers. So asking the head teacher how we would feel in that, so they can reassure their staff that if they're learning purposefully, then I haven't got a problem with that. And if I'm a teacher and I hear some noise next door, well, I know that they're doing a physical active learning task. So these conversations need to happen. So poke the fire and have these conversations with your staff. Okay, number 3. Let's move that so we can see it. Set clear expectations. Now, this is vital really for any whole school approach, if you like, or something that's new to the children, particularly to the children. And it also helps what we were talking about before, which was those, well, you know, maybe kind of behavior might creep in and things like that. Well, we need to normalize physical active learning. If you just as a teacher or any of your staff got up and said, right, kids, we're going to go do some physical active learning, either outside or in the classroom, and they've never done that before with you, they're going to wonder what you've been drinking as a teacher. They're going to wonder, why is Mr. doing this? Why is that? What's he doing that for? So we need to normalize it, because that's when any misbehavior might occur, is when something's abnormal and they might get excited and overexcited. So let's normalize it. Set clear expectations across the whole school, EYFS to year 6. These could be linked to your whole school values. So make those links there with what those expectations are. There's some examples on the board, on the screen there. Listening, motivating. Can they give praise? Can they work as a team? Can they win and lose gracefully? Can they follow instructions? If these expectations are set whole school, they might be pinned up in every single classroom, from reception or nursery even, to year 6. Then as the children move through the year groups, they're used to those expectations in the previous year. They know exactly if their new teacher in their new year group gets them up and active, it's normal. They've done it before. They did it last year. They know what's expected of them because those rules are consistent across the school, and it helps to normalize the process and also adds to the whole school ownership. So set clear expectations before any physical active learning takes place. And that can be done in some kind of launch, perhaps in an assembly, whatever it might be. Number 4, interrupt sedentary time. So this is kind of, I've talked to their previous tips, 1 to 3, more kind of bigger picture, whole school buy-in, all the staff taking ownership. Number 4, interrupt sedentary time. This is a very kind of Victorian looking classroom, if you like, but as we know, in my opinion, this is a picture that is still all too familiar in primary schools and schools across the country. So this is what we need to try to interrupt. So can you encourage yourself and your staff to be thinking, where are those moments in my lessons where children are sat down for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes at a time? Where in the day does that happen? Where are those cold times in the day where there's some real sedentary time going on there and that's too long? So can we interrupt those? Can you think about where in the day, therefore, or within a lesson, you're going to interrupt that sitting? And it might be just something off the cuff. You might have realized, well, hang on a minute, they've been writing here for 30 minutes. I wasn't expecting them to do it for that long. We're going to do a little bit of physical activity or physical active learning. And it might be linked to what you're doing. Because we often think that those children who are sat down at their tables, well, they're focused, they're concentrating because they're sat down. They're listening to me, they're doing their work, but that's not always the case. We don't know what they're thinking. We have no idea what they're thinking unless we go up and we talk to them. Why does this picture necessarily represent what focus and concentration and good learning? It doesn't, and that's what I would ask you to, that's poking the fire as well a little bit as well. Can you interrupt some sedentary time with some physical active learning? Number 5, the drip feed approach. So perhaps you've had these conversations, you're wanting to embed physical active learning more. You might have your resource set up, whatever subscription that is, or maybe you're coming up with your own ideas. What I always say to schools, particularly those members of staff who are not very confident or who might be shy away from actually teaching in this way and using this approach, is use the drip feed approach. And this helps the children to be nurtured into the process as well. If you were to just say, right, we're going to do 30 minutes of physical active learning, and they've never done it before, that's overwhelming for them, it's overwhelming for you. Experiences might not be very good after that. So why not try a drip feed approach? Try a couple of minutes in one day. Might be a little times table activity, whatever it is, with links, some star jumps, whatever it might be. Try 2 minutes. If that goes well, maybe the next week, maybe 2 minutes each day. And then the next week, maybe we're going to do 5 minutes this time. And then the following week, they've been used to the 5, we're going to try 10. So maybe over 4 or 5 weeks, you're building the number of minutes that the children are taking part in physical active learning to nurture them in the process and get used to it, normalize it, but also to help yourself gain more confidence rather than just diving straight in with these really long activities that are physically active. To use that drip feed approach. Right in the center there, teaching assistant, just to highlight something. If there are children in your class, and again, this comes into how we can keep using that word, but nurture them into it. Well, if there's a little group or one child that you think might not cope with this too well, and that might be due to a special educational need, it might not. You utilize your teaching assistant. Ask them to maybe take that child or group of children out of your classroom, might be into an outdoor space, it might be to another indoor space, and do that activity that you want to do with your whole class in a little group. Get them to carry out that activity with them one-to-one or just in a little group. So again, it's not too overwhelming for those children. They're not getting too excited by 30 other children moving around in this way, whatever it might be. And then as they've got used to that activity, whatever it might be, we'll then maybe reintegrate them into the class to do a whole class activity, okay? So it's just little techniques and strategies like that that just help the jumping in process, if you like, when it comes to it. 2 more left. Utilize all environments. This is an important one. Traditionally, it might be easy to just think, well, physical active learning, you need space for that. So it needs to take place outside. You need a playground. You need a hall. Yes, wonderful. Outdoor space, playgrounds, fields, halls, great spaces for particularly moderate to vigorous physically active learning. It doesn't have to be the case though. And what I always encourage schools to say is, if it rains outdoors, I'm taking COVID off the table, if you like. If it's raining outdoors, and then physical active learning doesn't have to stop. If the hall's being used for the Christmas plays, it doesn't have to stop. It can take place in the classroom, particularly if you have gone through those steps: expectations, drip feed approach, normalizing it for the children. It can take place in small environments, and it takes a bit of bravery. It does, because I was there a few years ago in that position. This is my class, first ever class to do Burn to Learn physical active learning approach, the Year 4 class. This is a French class, and they're here doing a little bit of twister, practicing their French colours, practicing their body parts, all in French. So they're communicating in French. That little boy there stood up next to the teaching assistant. He is giving some instructions in French to the people, to the little children on the floor, and they had to react to his instructions. Around the room, there were also a little bit of a carousel of other physical active learning tasks, but a beanbag throwing, etc. Some sit-ups on the floor, some aerobic type activities. This was all taking place in the classroom. And this is what can be achieved. This is what can be achieved when that nurturing has gone on and when those expectations have been laid. And that little quote on the left is just to highlight really how this visual picture, if you compare that to before here, that picture compared to this one, how different that is. Whereas, and this little quote there says that as a visual picture, this is a really nice way of seeing, well, who is engaged in the task? When they're sat down, staring at the book, I don't know what they're thinking. They might not be thinking about the work, they might be thinking about sausages for tea. But when it comes to physical active learning as a visual picture, you know who is engaged because you know where they should be. Are they communicating? Are they getting on with what they should be doing? Because it's much more physical. It lends itself to that nice assessment of, well, are they learning? Are they engaged? And some teachers are surprised by that feedback it gives them. Last one is share, share, share. So this might be, well, straight away from day one, actually. As soon as teachers in your school are starting to use physical active learning strategies, that might be from a resource, but what you will find is hopefully you want to get to a point where we don't need to be spending thousands and thousands of pounds on a resource. What we need to be doing is coming up with our own ideas, our own physical active learning ideas that we've thought of because we're confident as teachers and we do it regularly, just like we would think up any creative idea for a lesson. Well, let's use our creativity to think of physical tasks. And that's what we want to get to. So when you are thinking of those, share. Nursery teacher, share what worked well in their class with a Year 6 teacher, because you'll be surprised at how many activities nursery do in a physical way that could be transcended and translated to Year 6 by simply obviously changing the content and differentiating how difficult it is. So share across key stage boundaries and don't be afraid to do that. Find 5 minutes in a staff meeting. Could be every week, could be every 2 weeks, where people share what they've been doing that week that's worked really well, what strategies have worked well. And again, that comes back to whole school ownership. Everyone's responsibility. SLT driving it from the top. We're going to give 5 minutes in a meeting. These are really important things. So we create that sharing environment and that forum to share ideas and support each other. Whistle stop tour, 7 top tips. Hope that's okay. I'm going to come out of my screen share now and come back to Gav.
Cheers for that, Alex. My mind is working overdrive right now. I think there's loads in there, and I think some of the messages is start small, get bigger. I think one of my questions that I had to kind of discuss was around what resistance you kind of came up against, and obviously confidence and stuff like that will be one. And I think inside 2, I think it was, where you talked about having those awkward conversations. I think we ask it with children, don't we, that, well, why are they behaving like that? What is it causing them to behave like that? So why are the teachers resistant? And if it's confidence, then you've got something to work towards from a PE lead. And I think knowing, and another slide, and I've kind of jotted down a few notes, that you've got the approval from senior leaders, from your head teacher, that if they do that walk and the looking into your classroom and kids are moving, it's okay. And I think that would then reduce some of that resistance as well, potentially from teachers, because they're going to have to be bold, they're going to have to be brave. But there's a real opportunity right now for physical activity to enhance people's lives. You know, there's a lot of talk around mental well-being of children because of COVID, and there's a lot of chat around catch up. Well, actually, this can be some of the armory to support both of those in 2 minutes, 20 minutes as part of a normal day. So I think there's lots to be thinking about there for schools, and I would always welcome them to contact myself or come direct to you. Just ask those questions, because that's what we're here to do, to support. I think it was slide 4 you had around interrupting sedentary time. There's a really good case study that we've got in from a school in North Yorkshire that done the research that people switch off after 20 minutes of sitting down. So they build it into their whole school policy that every 20 minutes, and this is across the whole school, the kids have a physical activity break. They got that brave. They did it in their SATs. So year 6, they started.
Yes, I heard about that. I think I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So year 6, they started with it in September. Anytime they were doing SATs preparation, they did. It was difficult for them. Kids went a bit wild. They spoke to the board that needed to speak to see what they needed to do. Like, shut the book. They weren't allowed to leave the desk, but they could stand up. Projected something onto the screen, and actually in their SATs exams, they did an activity break. Set the timer for 20 minutes. Went off. Did an activity break. And for the first time since the P lead had been at that school, which was about 10 years, there was above national average, but massively, like in the 90s and high 80s for literacy and numeracy and stuff like that. And he just said, it works, and we believed in it, but we had to overcome some of those barriers and stuff like that. And so the points around interrupting, and they've been on the journey. They'd been building up to that point for a number of years, and we're not asking every school that's watching this to do that.
It's successful, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That groundwork first.
Yeah.
Scientific evidence is inescapable, and it's there.
So. And if anybody wants a copy of that case study, get in touch. It's on our website. Have a look at it, because that's the message, and that's the power of movement. And again, you don't need the great outdoor space. Yes, you can take your learning outdoors if the weather allows, and you've got the space and all that sort of stuff. But we're not asking people to go run marathons and run competitions. Actually, movement is probably a good word for the physical side of stuff as well. Just get children moving in those classrooms. We understand it's difficult. We understand that there's a lot of stuff going on, but it does enhance learning.
You're right. And on that, because you just touched on it, and I failed to mention it in my presentation, but when you're looking at utilizing the indoor environment in particular, you'd assume when tables are kind of squashed together and things like that, think, well, how can the children move around in this classroom? Well, my advice always is, okay, we might not be talking here about some really vigorous physical activity, but that's not what physical active learning has to necessarily be about. It can be, and I say this, well, they move to go to the toilet, so they walk slowly through the classroom, hopefully. Well, let's teach them to interact with each other physically by just simply moving in between the desks from one area of the classroom to another. And it might be to pin something on the wall, or it might be to collect something. I've done relay races in classrooms, but we've lowered, or we've adapted the movement to a bit of speed walking in between the tables, then bending down and speed walking back. So, but if everything's in place for that, and they are prepared for that with all the work you've done before from those tips, then that can be achieved. So I guess it's just trying to open minds to not restricting yourself, and actually the classroom can be used. It just means adapting the movement.
Was there any kind of particular risk assessments or health and safety things that you looked at for kind of the physical active learning policy and stuff like that? And how did that look? And I know that's a whole nother conversation, but it's sometimes key, isn't it, to getting things across the line with schools?
Yes, it potentially. However, in my experience, particularly in the pilot school where we embedded Bird to Learn across the whole year, starting in September right through to July, and then we're able to evaluate the impact it had, I did not draw up any specific risk assessments to physical active learning. And this again comes to the whole school ownership, the conversations amongst all staff. We trusted each other, SLT, trusted teachers, whatever, who are teaching every single day in the classroom, to choose appropriate activities safely, that encouraged movement, but in a safe manner where they weren't at a correct speed, where they weren't going to be bumping into each other necessarily. So you kind of just made your own, you thought about what you might want to do, and the teachers felt supported and confident enough to just make little changes. If there was a particular area of the classroom that, oh yeah, there's a sharp corner, whatever, then it's just, so in terms of specific risk assessment, I don't believe that's just long as it's in line with your other your school policies in that respect, and health and safety policy. Yeah. So yeah, and that's my message to schools in any training is it's just trusting the teachers to do what they should be doing every single day. Yeah.
Real.
Now with COVID, it's a bit different potentially, but we could come to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I've been chatting to a lot of schools and how they're delivering school. Not just PE, not just physical active learning, school sport. Which is obviously our agenda, our bag, but the whole way that schools are delivering stuff is massively different at the moment, and it might not be right to do it now, but equally it could be the opportunity because everything is different right now.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how it can improve mental well-being and stuff like that, and what I hear a lot of head teachers through the conversation I've had over the last few weeks is that they're talking about kind of the loss that children have had over the COVID period of things like routine and structure and friendship and opportunity. And it's another tool, isn't it, to support them to get that back and understand and build their confidence back up, because we've all been knocked by this. Everybody in the world has been affected by this in some way or another. And children are not exempt from that just because they're young. So this is an opportunity for physical active learning, especially if PE might be getting dropped down the agenda a little bit because they want to do catch up across the other curriculum areas. And again, everybody's catch up is going to be different, but actually this can be a way that we can enhance movement and increase physical activity levels and of our students whilst supporting that wider learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It can. If you look at those, you mentioned it, the routines and structures and, children's opportunities and the friendships and the social side of it, movement, again, using the word movement and doing more physical active learning can really, really enhance that, because what I find is movement naturally is a catalyst for children to be more social. And that, again, is a message that I give to schools is that simply by interacting with each other, let's say within the classroom, walking around each other, talking to each other, then moving to another person and then moving to another person, it naturally allows children to be more social. And all the research out there from psychologists is the most extremely happy people are the most social. They're not the most rich, they're not the most good looking, luckily for me. They are the most social. That's what makes happy people. So anything we can do to encourage children to interact verbally, but even physically, I'd even say physical interaction is crucial. And particularly at this time, recovery curriculums and enhancing catch-up programs, well, why not combine the two? Why not have physical activity, which promotes mental well-being, which helps their learning and their memory retention, and also working on those things that they've missed out on academically for the past 6 months. So, it's just a perfect solution for me at the moment if, as a school, you can find a way of integrating it safely. So if it is in the classroom, it's not vigorous. There's no perspiration. It is just slightly more moderate kind of movement. If you've got an opportunity to be outdoors, well, it could be just as vigorous as any PE activity. Some really, some strong relay races or whatever it might be. So yeah, that would be my message. Just align it with your current risk assessments, but use it as an opportunity, not a restriction.
Right, brilliant. Cheers for all that, Alex. Alex has got some videos on YouTube as well, just to start encouraging ideas and stuff like that, and some things that schools can do if they want. So we can get that link up there as well. I'd like to thank Alex for his time tonight. I know he's got to dash off soon for to look after his kids and stuff like we all got to do with this working from home. Please get in touch if you found it useful. If you want any further information and stuff like that, that's exactly what we're here to do. So thank you so much for your time, for taking time to out your evening, Alex, to present this for us and give us your expertise.
No, that's okay. I'm just on the end of an email. and I'm happy to support in any way I can. And as Gab's alluded to, yes, there are video resources on Burn to Learn TV on YouTube and on Facebook. So by all means, click into that, and some great home learning tasks as well. If you do have children at home, or you want to set a task for maybe parents to do, there's some activities based in the home, and I can get your kids active and learning at home as well at the same time. But no, thanks for inviting me, Gav. Loved it, and we'll speak soon.
Speak to you soon. Thank you.